we will be discussing the very last learning objective. 3, explain how to account for payroll. We'll start with payroll for employees and then for employers. So what is payroll? You have payroll that is managerial, administrative, and sales personnel, and usually it is expressed as salaries, which could be monthly or annual rate, versus wages, so it could be store clerks, factory employees, or manual laborers, and typically for them you will be given the rate per hour. So to determine the payroll, you need 3 amounts: gross earnings, payroll deductions, and then what is net pay. Okay, so how do we come up with gross earnings? Gross earnings is total compensation that is earned by employees, wages or salaries, any bonuses, and commission. How would you calculate it? In the United States, we do have a set amount of hours that an employee could work a week, and it is 40. If I work more than 40 hours a week, I have to be paid at a time and a half of regular rate. That's why up here, regular hours that I work for 40 at $12 an hour, but then I actually worked 44. That's why the extra 4 hours were considered to be overtime, and they will be a time and a half. So 12 times 1.5, $18 an hour. So basically, if the employer makes the employee works too much, then they will have to pay for it, literally. Okay, so I would really like for you to know and keep in mind employee versus employer items related to payroll. So employee has payroll deductions or withholdings. Again, those are for employee. So if you start with gross pay, for example, you might agree to be paid $10 an hour. You will not receive $10 an hour. Why? Because there's some payroll deductions that have to be withheld, and you will end up with net pay, the remaining dollar amount. Payroll deductions could be either mandatory, so they have to be withheld, versus they could be voluntary, so they don't have to be withheld. So let's see what's mandatory. One of them is FICA taxes. We'll discuss FICA in the next screen. It has 2 pieces to it. Basically, it funds 2 big funds for the government and for us ultimately. Then you have federal income tax. So you know that we all pay income taxes, right? Usually at the end of the year, so ours federal are due April 15th, but we have to pay taxes as we go. So that's why the employer is required to withhold a certain percentage towards the federal income tax, and very similar state income tax. In some cities, there's also a city-imposed income tax. Here in the Quad Cities, we don't have any. So these are the 3 items that are mandatory. And then you could have also voluntary deduction towards insurance, whether it's health, dental, vision, insurance for disabilities, etc. You can have pensions or 401k and union dues. And another one will be charity. So if I start with gross pay, subtract all the deductions, I will end up with net remaining pay. That's the amount that you usually have either deposited into your checking account, or they will cut the check for that amount. Okay, so let's look again at the mandatory deductions, and here's that FICA that I promised you. FICA includes Social Security and Medicare tax. So one part will fund your Social Security upon retirement, and the other one will fund the Medicare. So these are the amounts that are funded, and then we have federal income tax and state income tax. So how much is Social Security tax? Social Security is levied on both employees and employer, and the same with Medicare. So you can see employee and employer, employee and employer. So basically it's the exact match. So one is paying and the other one is matching. For Social Security, sometimes it feels a little bit tricky, so I will try to draw a timeline for you guys here with the money line. How does it work? So it is 6.2% on salary and wages up to 127,200, and this amount is changed annually, so you don't need to memorize it. If they want you to specifically calculate these taxes, they will give you that amount. Okay, so I would say if here's my salary, right, and somewhere up here, and it's for the year, it will be 127,200. Okay, and let's say I earned that year 150. Okay, 150. That's how I made that particular year. So high earner. So the rationale is that you will be paying 6.2% of your 127,200, and then Social Security will stop, because as a high earner there's a good chance you will have other sources of income, so you will not be dipping in Social Security as much. But then Medicare taxes are without limitations, so my whole annual salary of 150 is subject to 1.45%. Okay, in some of the smaller exercises, like brief exercises, they will just say that all earnings are subject to FICA, meaning both, and they will give you the percentage, so it will be 7.65. So together they will say all earnings. Or if they say the salary was only 30,000, you can safely assume it's below the threshold of 127, so all of it will be subject to FICA, both Social Security and Medicare, at 7.65. I hope it does make sense. We might do a calculation for this one in class. Okay, what about other deductions? I already discussed the federal income tax, so that is required withholding, right? And withholdings are based on growth wages and the number of allowances claimed. So we'll take a look at the table so you know how it works. And then most states and some cities, as I said, would require the employers to withhold also earnings from employees towards their state and city taxes. Okay, so here's a small calculation. If you start with growth earnings, it looks like here's all the amounts. We have these as mandatory and these as voluntary, and if you add them up, so minus, this is the amount that will be paid in red as net pay. So quite significant difference, fortunately for us. Okay, so what is that? That is a payroll register. So it's a very large table that will list. So for example, here's, well, it's not a payroll record. It's just an earnings for one employee, for Michael Jordan. So these period endings probably were created from a timesheet, hours worked, and you can see that he works a majority of time overtime, over 40. That's why we have regular and then we have overtime. So either 2 or 4 or 3 hours, etc. Here's your total and here's your cumulative. Cumulative meaning from the beginning of the year. Why would they have cumulative? Well, then you will know when you're going to hit that overall 127, so you can stop withholding for Social Security. The amount taken out for FICA, federal income tax, state income tax, United Fund, etc. And here's your payments. Here's the net amount and the check number. Okay, this is the payroll register. So what is that one? How is that different? Here's all the employees, including Michael Jordan. and you will list for a particular week or 2 weeks, depending how often you do that. And list number of hours, earnings, regular, then overtime and gross, then all the deductions that were taken out, right? So if you take total gross minus total deductions or withholdings, it will give you net pay, right? So equal net pay. And then check number that was given. Amount debited, so debit will be to salaries and wages expense, and then credits will be to each respective deduction with the word payable to it. So it will be credit to FICA payable for total amount, credit to federal income tax payable with this amount, state income paid, etc. And what is the very final credit for this net amount paid? So that will be either cash if payment was done right away, or if they're still cutting checks and they were not distributed, then it will be salaries and wages payable. Okay. So here's the journal entry that I was trying to explain. Salaries and wages expense, gross. Okay, so this is gross amount. Gross. Then you will list all the deductions as you go through with the word payable. Don't forget the word payable, right? It's not an expense because it's not an expense for an employer. These are deductions from employees. So we're the ones who are ultimately paying them. And then salaries and wages payable, this is net amount that will be paid. Okay, and here's the payday. We will debit salaries and wages payable and then credit cash when we either distribute them the checks or deposit it automatically. Okay, and here is the amount of check, right, for Michael Jordan. And here is also a record that you usually see attached to your check that it explains exactly, or almost like a snippet of your payroll register, how many hours you worked, what are your regular earnings, overtime, and then the amounts withheld. So I would encourage you to take a look next time you will get your check, just for fun of it, because it's nice to see something that we're actually studying in class as well. And here is a small exercise. In January, gross earnings for Ramirez Company were $40,000. All earnings, so again, all earnings are below 127. That's why they're subject to full amount of FICA. Federal income tax withheld was 9. State income tax 1,000. What's your net pay? And then record the payroll. How do you know net pay? Take your gross, subtract all withholdings. The first one is FICA, right? FICA, it's hard to write with this pen now. Then also federal, and then income tax withholdings, and here's your net pay, the total amount. How do you record it? Salaries and wages expense, so that's what the employer will pay, right? But it's not what the employees will receive. That's because of the withholdings, right? So here's your FICA amount, then federal income tax, state income tax, and then this is your net amount, salaries and wages payable.